Don Rickles. For over 50 years, he was Hollywood's Mr. Warmth, a man who could insult Frank Sinatra to his face and get a laugh. He was the master of the roast, the merchant of venom. But everyone he targeted knew it was just an act, right? For years, a legend has circulated among comedy insiders about a lost tape, a recording where Don Rickles supposedly dropped the act and named the 7 comedians he genuinely couldn't stand. We're going to break down that legendary list and separate the myth from the shocking truth. To understand why this legend even exists, you have to understand the man. Don Rickles wasn't just a comedian, he was an institution. Born in Queens in 1926, he was a World War II vet who tried to be a dramatic actor. When that didn't pan out, he turned to stand-up and found his true calling not in telling jokes, but in his lightning-fast off-the-cuff responses to the audience. They ate it up. He wasn't telling jokes. He was the joke, and the crowd was his target. He famously called people hockey pucks, a signature that was somehow both aggressive and harmless. His huge break came in 1957 when he spotted Frank Sinatra in a Miami club. Most comics would have frozen. Rickles, instead, looked at one of the most powerful men in showbiz and said, "Make yourself at home, Frank, hit somebody." Sinatra, instead of getting mad, absolutely lost it laughing. That moment set the Rickles formula, an insult delivered with so much audacious charm it felt like a compliment. He became a fixture of the Rat Pack, a regular on Johnny Carson's *Tonight show* for decades, and the undisputed king of the celebrity roast. His entire persona was built on the idea that it was all for show. He was Mr. Warmth, the guy who would destroy you on stage and then hug you backstage. He even said it himself, "If I were to insult people and mean it, that wouldn't be funny." But that's exactly what makes the legend of the lost tape so juicy. What if, for just a few people, he did mean it? The rumor, whispered in green rooms for years, is that a private recording exists where Rickles, speaking to a friend, finally named names, a list of 7 comedians whose style or personality genuinely got under his skin. So, we're going to dive into that legend. We'll go name by name through this supposed list, looking at the history and the relationships to figure out what was real, what was rumor, and what the truth says about the man behind Mr. Warmth. Is the tape real? That's the whole mystery. But the stories behind the names, they are very, very real. The first name the legend claims is on Rickles' tape is a giant of comedy's golden age, Milton Berle, Uncle Mitty, Mr. Television. For a while, he was the biggest star in America. To get why Rickles might have had an issue with him, you have to understand their different worlds. Berle was the old guard, a vaudeville pro who hosted the first mega-hit TV show, Texaco Star Theater. He was a joke-teller, a sketchman, a master of the big and broad. Rickles, though, was part of a new wave. He was an improviser, a comic whose act was a thrilling high-wire performance that changed every night. He prided himself on instinct and originality. Rickles once said, "I've never written anything down. Call it a sixth sense. The lines just come." This was his art's in-the-moment comedy. And right there is the supposed problem. Milton Berle had a notorious, industry-wide reputation for one thing: stealing jokes. The stories are legendary. People said he had a photographic memory for gags and would borrow or just plain steal from anyone. It was so well known that other comedians would joke about it right to his face. The legend of the tape says this was no laughing matter for Rickles. For a craftsman like him, who built a career on having a unique voice, Berle's alleged plagiarism would have been the ultimate sin. It was a total disrespect for the art form. While other comics might have shrugged it off as just Mitty being Mitty, the rumor is that Rickles saw it as a kind of corruption. Their public interactions, of course, were always professional. They roasted each other like the pros they were, trading jabs and getting huge laughs. But was there some deeper resentment? The evidence is all circumstantial, based on knowing what Rickles valued. The truth, however, is a lot more complicated. When Milton Berle died in 2002, Don Rickles gave a eulogy at his funeral. He called Berle his hero and a big father to him, sharing warm stories about their families, spending holidays together. Those aren't the words of a man holding a grudge for decades. So what's the real story? The legend points to a clash of comedic values. The reality seems to be that whatever professional issues Rickles may have had, they were trumped by a genuine, personal affection that lasted a lifetime. The so-called hate was likely a myth, but the artistic conflict it was based on was very real. The second name on this mythical tape is a guy who was the embodiment of the wild, untamed spirit of old Las Vegas, Shecky Greene. For those who don't know, Shecky Greene wasn't just a comedian, he was a force of nature. He and Rickles were both kings of the Vegas lounge scene, but where Rickles' act was a controlled explosion, Greene's was pure, uncut chaos. Greene was famous for his manic energy and unpredictable, often self-destructive behavior. Stories of him heckling his own audience or driving a car into the fountain at Caesar's Palace are legendary. He was brilliant, hilarious, and, by all accounts, completely exhausting. The story goes that Don Rickles, the ultimate professional, couldn't stand it. Rickles showed up on time, did his job, and delivered, night after night. His act, while seemingly off the cuff, was built on disciplined craftsmanship, a mindset he might have picked up in the Navy. The alleged conflict wasn't about jealousy, both were huge stars, it was about temperament. Rickles, the disciplined artist, supposedly couldn't stand Greene, the agent of chaos. You can just imagine Rickles, who prided himself on controlling a room, watching Greene, who seemed to thrive on losing control of it. It's easy to picture Rickles seeing Greene's antics not as genius, but as a lack of respect for the audience. In the high-stakes world of Vegas, where casinos demanded reliability, Greene's wildness could have been seen as unprofessional. The tape, according to the legend, catches Rickles venting about a peer who he felt was a liability. Yet, when you look for actual evidence of a feud, you come up empty. There are no public records of them badmouthing each other. They were two titans of the same era, two sides of the same Vegas coin. One was the sharp edge of insult comedy, the other, its wild, anarchic soul. In a clip from an old talk show, Rickles tells a story that involves both Frank Sinatra and Shecky Greene, and there's not a hint of bad blood. So, did Rickles really hate Shecky Greene? The legend wants you to think so. It paints a picture of a pro looking down on an unpredictable colleague, but it's more likely that Rickles, like everyone else in Vegas, just saw Shecky Greene as ... Well, Shecky Greene, he was a unique and sometimes maddening talent. The hatred on the supposed tape is probably just a dramatic retelling of a more nuanced professional opinion, a mix of awe for his raw talent and frustration with his chaotic methods. The third name whispered to be on Rickles' secret tape is, maybe the most philosophically important, Lenny Bruce. If the supposed issue with Berle was about ethics, and with Greene it was about style, the alleged conflict with Lenny Bruce was about the very soul of comedy. They were both Jewish comedians who came up in the same era, but they couldn't have been more different. Don Rickles was the ultimate insider. His whole act worked because he was part of the establishment. He roasted stars and presidents, but he did it from inside the ballroom. His insults worked because he was one of them. He was the court jester, allowed to speak truth to power as long as everyone knew it was all in good fun. His comedy, while sharp, ultimately kept the social order intact. Lenny Bruce was the wrecking ball. He was the ultimate outsider, a counterculture prophet who used comedy to critique society. Bruce didn't just tell jokes, he delivered searing monologues on religion, racism, and hypocrisy. He didn't want to make the establishment laugh, he wanted to expose it. For that, he was branded a sick comic, hounded by authorities, and arrested again and again for obscenity. His career became a series of legal battles that destroyed him, leading to his tragic death in 1966. The legend says that Rickles was deeply troubled by Lenny Bruce. It claims Rickles saw him not as a comedian, but as a tragic figure who had crossed a line. For Rickles, comedy was a job meant to make people happy. For Bruce, it was a dangerous mission. Rickles never worked blue. He could be vicious, but he never got into the kind of graphic stuff that was Bruce's specialty. The legend claims Rickles saw Bruce's act as a betrayal. People came to a club to forget their troubles, not to get a lecture. There's a fascinating story from Larry King about having both Rickles and Bruce on his show in the early 60s. Bruce, in a typically provocative move, showed up in a prison uniform. As he went on a long philosophical tangent about it, Rickles just sat there, stone-faced. After Bruce finished, Rickles simply looked at him and said, "Lenny, get a job." That one line says everything about the gap between them. It was the pragmatist versus the philosopher, the entertainer versus the agitator. Was it hatred? Probably not. It was a fundamental, irreconcilable difference in how they saw their job. Rickles likely saw Bruce as a guy who broke the jester's golden rule, Never forget you're there to entertain the king, not overthrow him. Moving into the 70s, the fifth name on the mythical Rickles tape is a titan who, in many ways, was his closest peer in style and spirit, Joan Rivers. And for that very reason, their supposed rivalry is one of the most complex. The others on this list were about clashes in philosophy. This one, according to the legend, was about territory. There can only be one monarch of Mean, and Rickles was the king. But Joan Rivers was, without a doubt, the queen. Both were from New York. Both were Jewish. And both honed their acts in the tough clubs of the 60s. They shared a comedic DNA. Rickles jabbed at a celebrity's career. Rivers would ask, "Can we talk?" before launching into a scathing critique of celebrity culture. The legend suggests this similarity bred a quiet resentment, at least on Rickles' side. The story goes that Rickles, the established king, saw her as a pretender to his throne. Insults, celebrity targets, acid with that was his domain. Their public appearances together were a masterclass in competitive respect. When Rickles was on The Late Show starring Joan Rivers in 1984, the energy was electric. He immediately ribbed her, saying, "Johnny Carson hired you because he knows you're no threat." She fired right back. It was like watching two heavyweights, but it felt different, more like a sibling rivalry. This rivalry narrative hit its peak when Rivers became the permanent guest host for Johnny Carson, who was Rickles' great friend. When she left in '86 for her own competing show, it created a massive feud with Carson, who felt betrayed and never spoke to her again. The legend claims Rickles sided firmly with his friend Johnny, seeing Joan's move as disloyal. But again, the legend oversimplifies things. While they were professional rivals, there's plenty of evidence of mutual admiration. Rickles appeared on her shows multiple times, and their chemistry was undeniable. They were like two master swordsmen, admiring each other's blades even as they sparred. In one appearance, Rickles told Joan, "We do what we do. You do your thing, I do mine. You stand alone." It was a moment of genuine, unvarnished respect. Did Rickles hate Joan Rivers? The claim feels thin. Was he a fierce competitor? Absolutely. Did he see her as his main rival? Almost certainly. But the legend likely mistakes the heat of professional competition for personal hatred. The truth is probably that Don Rickles saw Joan Rivers as his equal, and for a king, acknowledging an equal is the most complicated relationship of all. As comedy moved into the raw, loud 1980s, a new type of comedian emerged, and the sixth name, allegedly, on the Rickles tape is the embodiment of this new wave, the primal force of nature known as Sam Kinison. If Rickles was a surgeon with a scalpel, Kinison was a maniac with a chainsaw. A former preacher, Kinison brought a terrifying fire and brimstone intensity to the stage. He'd start his act calmly, before building into a rage, unleashing guttural screams as he raged about relationships and religion. His act was loud, aggressive, and steeped in a rock and roll attitude that was a world away from Rickles' Vegas. Showrooms. The legend presents this as a massive generational clash. It alleges that Rickles viewed Kinison's act with pure disgust, seeing it as the decay of comedy. Where Rickles' insults had wit and a core of warmth, Kinison's felt like raw, unfiltered rage. It wasn't about being clever. It was about visceral assault. For Rickles, the merchant of venom, the key was always control. Kinison, on the other hand, was famous for an out-of-control lifestyle and an act that felt like it was always on the verge of a total breakdown. The legend suggests Rickles saw this not as art, but as a deeply unprofessional and unpleasant spectacle. He built a career making insults feel good. Kinison wanted his audience to feel the full force of his anger. As with others on this list, there's no direct evidence of a feud. Their careers ran on parallel tracks that rarely crossed. Rickles was an established legend, playing to his loyal older fans in Vegas. Kinison was the voice of a new, angrier generation, playing to packed rock clubs. But you can see why the legend exists. It's the old guard looking at the new and not respecting what they see. It's the classicist horrified by the chaos. Did Rickles spend his nights fuming about Sam Kinison? Probably not. But if you'd asked for his opinion on 80s comedy, it's easy to imagine him preferring cleverness over screaming. The hatred on the tape is likely a myth, but it points to a very real cultural divide. It was the sound of one comedy world fading, and another, much louder one, being born. And so we come to the seventh and final name, the one the legend saves as the biggest shocker. After joke thieves, Vegas madmen, and social prophets, the last comedian Don Rickles supposedly couldn't stand was Jerry Seinfeld. On its face, this claim is the most baffling, and it's here that the whole legend of the lost tape falls apart and reveals the truth. First, let's look at the supposed logic. Seinfeld's comedy is meticulously crafted, brilliantly written, and focused on the little details of everyday life. It's clean, precise, and cerebral. The legend claims Rickles saw this style as the exact opposite of everything he stood for. It suggests Rickles viewed Seinfeld's comedy as sterile and passionless, where Rickles was all heart and guts, feeding off the crowd. Seinfeld was a cool, detached observer. The story goes that Rickles, the master of human interaction, looked at Seinfeld, the master of human observation, and saw a man talking about life instead of living it on stage. It's a compelling story, and it is completely, 100% false. The truth is, Don Rickles and Jerry Seinfeld had a relationship built on deep and publicly documented mutual admiration. Seinfeld has repeatedly called Don Rickles one of the four faces, on his personal Mount Rushmore of stand-up comedy. He didn't just respect Rickles, he revered him, and the feeling was clearly mutual. The definitive proof comes from a 2013 episode of Seinfeld's own show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. In it, Jerry picks up Don, and what follows is not a tense meeting of rivals, but a warm, hilarious, and genuinely touching conversation between an icon and his biggest fan. They laugh, they trade stories, and they talk about the old days. Jerry respectfully calls him Mr. Rickles, while Don playfully ribs him in classic fashion. There isn't a hint of animosity. There is only warmth and respect. This episode doesn't just contradict the legend of the tape, it completely destroys it. It proves that the entire premise of Rickles hiding secret hatreds is almost certainly a myth, created to add a dark edge to the Mr. Warmth persona. The inclusion of Seinfeld, a claim so demonstrably false, exposes the rest of the list as pure speculation. What have we found? We've explored 7 alleged feud stories of rivalry, philosophy, and generational clashes. We've seen the kernels of truth that might have started these rumors: Berle's reputation for theft, Greene's chaotic energy, the artistic differences with Bruce and Kaufman, and the competitive fire with Rivers. But every time, the hate narrative falls apart. Rickles gave a loving eulogy for Milton Berle. His feud with Lenny Bruce was just one line on a talk show. The conflicts with Kaufman and Kinison were stylistic, not personal. His rivalry with Joan Rivers was built on mutual respect, and the final name, Jerry Seinfeld, debunks the whole thing. Their documented friendship proves Rickles wasn't some bitter old man railing against the new generation. He was secure in his own legacy and could appreciate and befriend a comedian whose style was the polar opposite of his own. The truth of the lost tape is that it almost certainly doesn't exist. It's a piece of comedy folklore that misunderstands what made Don Rickles a genius. The point of Mr. Warmth wasn't that he secretly hated everyone. It was that his insults were so masterful, they felt like love. It didn't matter if you were Frank Sinatra or some guy in the front row. You were part of the club. The real story isn't about who Don Rickles hated. It's about the incredible balancing act he maintained for more than 50 years. He walked the finest of lines, turning venom into affection and making an insult a term of endearment. The legend of the tape is a great story, but the truth is far more impressive. He was the one-of-a-kind, irreplaceable merchant of venom, whose insults were a strange and beautiful form of grace. Who on this list surprised you the most? And who do you think Don Rickles secretly admired? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this investigation, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the secret histories of Hollywood.